Welcome to Life and Liberty Radio with David Householder. I'm Josh Jose, and together, you and I are taking another step toward freedom, both spiritual and political. So get comfortable, breathe in, and ignite your imagination. Envision a society that is spiritually deep and truly free. It's easy if you try.
Frosty Westering passed away recently, and you've probably never heard of him. Well, he was my football coach in college, and I think it's important that you do hear about him because he was a remarkable, remarkable man. I first heard about him when I was young from my grandfather. My grandfather was the director of admissions at Pacific Lutheran University. His name was J.E. Danielson, and he and I were very, very close. And he told me about this remarkable new football coach named Frosty Westering, and how he was a motivational speaker, and how he went to a dinner, and Frosty got up and spoke, and Frosty had them all putting spoons on the end of their noses. And there I was at Denny's with my grandfather, and he taught me how to hang a spoon on the end of my nose. And I thought, this is kind of strange. And then he looked at me, my grandfather did, and said, Frosty's into PhD football. And I knew what a PhD was, I think, a doctoral degree. And my grandfather says, that stands for pride, hustle, and desire, PhD. And I thought, what is this about? What is this about? I don't really get it. But turns out I ended up playing football for Frosty Westering. I showed up the summer before my freshman year, and I was playing defensive end. And you won't find my records anywhere at PLU because I was decidedly unremarkable. What I got from football had almost nothing to do with the game of football, which I still, to this day, love playing. And at age 52, I still think I could do it, even though I probably couldn't. It's one of those fantasies I continue to have. But I had a remarkable time at PLU, and it wasn't so much playing football. It was listening to Frosty. And oh, my goodness, he could talk. At least half of the practice sometimes, he would just have us sitting there taking a knee, and he would talk, and he would expound on all kinds of things. And he was pretty spellbinding and very easy to understand, even for a 18-year-old kid like myself. I was at the peak of my immaturity, had no idea what was going on, and Frosty was pouring this wisdom into our heads, and I kept thinking, when's the real practice going to come, and when we're really going to do practice like we did in high school? And it never really came. We practiced a lot without pads, and most of it was Frosty talking. And occasionally I just got bored. Oh, my goodness, when's he going to stop? He'd go on and on and on, even though it was sinking in to my brain at a very, very high level. Looking back now, I'm thinking, this guy was into character formation. And I didn't realize at the time, of course, didn't even know what character formation was, but he was molding our characters. And he put a tattoo on my soul, which is there to this very day. There are very few people who affected me as deeply as did Frosty Westering, even though I doubt he even really remembers before he passed away who I was, because I was, as I say, a rather unremarkable football player who just couldn't get it out of my system, so kept playing in college. And Frosty really was all about character formation, and it worked, not just in life, but in football. He made the top 10 all-time coaches in wins. He is 305-96, which is a remarkable record. There's actually only 3 coaches ahead of him that I recognize right off the bat: Eddie Robinson from Grambling, Bear Bryant from Alabama, and Amos Alonzo Stagg from the University of Chicago, the original Monsters of the Midway. Frosty Westering is way ahead of Joe Paterno, Lou Holtz, Woody Hayes, Bo Schembechler. And he was coaching in the lowest division of college football, NAIA 2 and NCAA 3. Now, if you're unfamiliar with NCAA 3, it's because it's never on the news. It's even in the local papers. It's girls softball teams from 8th grade get better press than we did. And you pretty much had to wash your own uniform and get your own ride to the game because there really was no bus. You just sort of did it. And in the stands were more or less just girlfriends and parents. It wasn't a big deal. Much smaller crowds than we had in high school. And we had some gnarly games. We played against Linfield in the mud, played against UPS. We had some tough competition. So this wasn't really a patsy kind of of league we were in at all. And Frosty was an amazing coach and very effective coach. And with very, very little of what I would call physical training, he was able to do amazing things just by crafting us into the kind of people who prevailed and crafting us into the kind of young men that made a difference in the world and could get things done. And when you're looking at young men at that age, that's a pretty remarkable thing. In effect, he was one of our campus pastors at Pacific Lutheran University. It's a small university, 2,000-3,000 students, and he was a spiritual figure there in a big way. He would often lead us in communion. He would talk about his faith. He would put his faith together with his action. So faith was not separate from football. Faith was a part of football, and he used football as kind of an illustration of how faith gets put to work, and something you could actually quantify, which was really kind of working for me, even though my faith really hadn't come alive at that point. There was a sort of a weekly, report that we had to send in. It was a weekly sense of improvement that we would write to him, and he would write with comments and red ink all over it and add away, and that's good. He was always positive, and you could not get him to say a negative thing. And I did some really stupid things playing football because my head wasn't really fully formed yet. My brain wasn't formed. And he would look me right in the face, and he says, get him next time. Get him next time. You just don't know. You don't know. And this is probably the lightest ways you can let someone down at that age. I never felt judged by him at all, even though my talent level certainly wasn't very high. I remember whenever we scored, he'd have us do the Big Five. And every time I drive by a Big Five sporting goods, I think of Frosty. And I think of having us hold up our one hand with 5 fingers and say Big Five, which means we score again in the next 5 minutes. And it's amazing how intentionality works. And on the sidelines, we all had our hands up with 5 fingers up. And just that little motion, we're going to score again in 5 minutes. I can't imagine how many points that accounted for. When you focus on scoring again quickly, it's amazing how often you do that. And even in losing, he was very, very gracious. And he never let us get all hyped up. He called it phony psych. We would walk out there and act normal. No jumping up and down, no go stuff. It was just, act like you belong here and know what you're doing. One of his favorite phrases was calm intensity. And I still to this day remember that. And I think that I've carried that with me for decades now, a sense of calm intensity and a love for physical fitness, which to this day I still continue carrying on from those days, because he didn't totally neglect that. We did a lot of things to stay in shape, and a lot of them are kind of unconventional, like exergenies. And if you want to look that up, you certainly can. It's not your typical weight training, certainly for young football players in college. So it was a lot of fun. I learned a lot. My funniest experience was playing on the JV team my freshman year, and we had a hard time finding other teams that wanted to play us because there aren't a lot of JV teams at Division III level. The teams are pretty small, and we had a pretty big team because everybody wanted to play for Frosty because he was just this larger-than-life figure, and we were all sort of drawn to him in a really big way. And we finally found a team that would play us, and that was, of all people, the University of Washington Huskies had a JV team, a junior varsity team, and we were so excited we got a real game here. And they showed up with their buses, and I still remember to this day 3 buses. I don't know how many buses. We had to get our own rides to the game, and they showed up in these 3 buses to play a game at our practice field. And I remember seeing them coming off the bus with their shiny helmets, thinking, oh boy, these guys are all way bigger than our varsity team, than our first team. And I didn't know what we were going to do about this. I was a defensive end. And I remember thinking, well, let's get out there with some calm intensity and Big Five this thing and the whole deal. And I remember the first quarter, we were just getting ground into hamburger. And I by the second quarter, they were sort of scoring at will against us. And I remember throwing up during halftime on the sidelines, just throwing up and throwing up and throwing up. I'm not sure why. I probably got my bell wrong. And I don't remember a single thing from the whole second half, not a thing. But I do remember carrying a lot of pride into that game and sticking with it and making it all the way through and thinking to myself, this is something I wouldn't have been able to do. We we basically survived the onslaught of the University of Washington Huskies, which is pretty impressive if you think about it. Pretty impressive thing. So, in any case, that was a funny experience, and I remember it to this day. But there's something about just getting up there and showing up and making it happen and facing incredible odds, getting slaughtered in the process, but still doing the best we could and feeling pretty good about it at the end. I still feel pretty good about making it through that game against the Huskies. The most profound phrase he ever had was this: make the big time where you are. So don't try to make someone else's big time. If you end up in a small town, make the big time. Become one of the leaders. Become one of the people that makes things happen. And if you're in a little company, make it the best little company you can. And if you're not noticed by anybody, it doesn't mean you're not important. You still can make the big time wherever you are. And this is, of all the things I've learned, that's certainly in the top 5. And my prayer for you and my hope for you is that wherever you are, don't begrudge your station in life or where you've been deployed, or that you're not on the red carpet, or you're not noticed by anybody, or that you aren't one of those people that people pay attention to. Well, make the big time there. We made the big time in Division III football, and Frosty made a big impact on hundreds and hundreds of young men. And it's in his honor that I do this podcast today. So I'm going to close just by saying, make the big time where you are.
So put some sunshine and water on these fresh ideas and keep taking that next step toward freedom. Join us every weekday for the latest life and liberty ideas. The views expressed on this program are purely those of the presenter, and not necessarily those of the advertisers or organizations or persons with which the presenter has a relationship. Please click on the Amazon banner at the top of the Life and Liberty page, and consider doing all your online shopping through this portal. See you tomorrow.